to the first adventure of a program for which we don't yet have a name. And what I'm interested in doing for at least a few of these is to show people how things that in the supporting infrastructure of our lives have changed over our lifetime. And so today we're starting out with the fire department. I have Chief Doherty and I have Bill Hamilton here to give us kind of bookends on the science of firefighting. And I have a little intro. I wanted to have a show and tell, but I haven't been able to find the show and tell. This is a story from my father, who was never one to let the truth get in the way of a good story, but I have some ascertained proof of a story. But going back, and this would have been 1938, he worked for Pratt & Whitney in Connecticut, where they built airplane engines and things like that. And there was a fire in the test cell where he and another guy were, and the only way out was to crawl under a tank of aviation gasoline. My father made it. The guy behind him hesitated. And the truth to that is there were definitely scars from burns on my father's back. And the infamous paycheck for 1 hour, because he walked out and never went back, and they paid him for an hour. So that's kind of my introduction. I could tell more fire stories, but I have people here that can do a better job. So, Bill, sir, I guess if we can start with you, kind of, you know, what it was typically like going to a fire call, what it was typically like in, you know, in your day hanging out in the fire station.
Hi, I'm Bill Hamilton. I'm a townie. I actually write Tales from a Townie in the Hopkinton Independent. You've probably seen my name there before. I'll go back to starting with my father. He started on the call fire department, which back then was the only department. There wasn't any full-time people. And he started in 1933, and he was a firefighter till 1976. I started as a call firefighter in 1964. I became one of the first 4 full-time firefighters in 1967. In fact, I worked the first scheduled night shift the department ever had, and it's been manned 24/7 ever since. I retired in 1994. It was a good career. I can tell more of the structure of the department a little later, probably.
Okay.
Chief?
How's it going? I'm also a second-generation firefighter. I started out as a junior firefighter back in the early 90s, and then went into the military. I was a firefighter in the Air Force until 2004, and then came to Hopkinton in August, started working full-time.
What I'm trying to, you know, when people watch this, I'd like them to see how they were served and protected when you were doing this, and then how they're served and protected now. And one of the things, I have 2 people lined up to talk about house construction.
Yeah.
Because that was an inspiration from a conversation that we had.
Right.
And so, you know, how the buildings that you're working on have changed, and how the problems that have come and gone with those changes. Some problems that we had we don't have anymore, and problems we didn't used to have that now we have.
Okay, so
how do you want to get into that? Like, you want to talk about fires, or like how quick they burn versus
Yeah.
like?
I'll do before, when I was born in 1941, and before that, the fire department was run by 3, they call them fire engineers. They were just regular people from the regular walks of life, like truck drivers or welders. And it was run by 3 people, and one of them would be the head engineer. And I don't even really think they call him the fire chief. And the fire chief, the first fire chief was around 1950. It was Joseph Pine. Second fire chief was Arthur Stewart. Third fire chief was Richard McMillan. Fourth fire chief was Gary Doherty Sr. Fifth was Kenny Clark. Sixth, Steve Slamman. Seventh, William Miller. And the present chief is Gary Doherty Jr. Before dial telephones, the department was actually run, when you call the fire department, you got the operator that was in the brick building at the corner of Hayden Row and Fenton Street, and she had a button to push that would blow the siren on the wooden fire station that was where the present fire station is. And the first person in, she'd tell them where the fire was, and they'd go and put the fire out. No radios. Radios didn't come in. My father actually was kind of responsible for the radios coming to the department, because we used to vacation in Rockland, Maine, and they got a government grant, and he came back to town and told the selectmen about the government grant, and they got a government grant. So somewhere in the early 50s, they got radios for the trucks. And when dial telephones came around in the late 40s, it caused a problem, because they took the operator out of the building. And what are we going to do to when the public calls in for a fire? So Joe Pine, the chief, ran a trucking company out of his backyard, which was 2 houses up from the fire station, and his wife ran the office. So she also ran the fire department during the day. And a call would come in, she'd take the call, and the first person would show up at the station. She had a phone hooked up, and the first person in, she'd tell them where the fire was, and there was a blackboard and it right where the fire was. And that's how they answered the alarms. So that worked. And then at nighttime, there was fire phones at the chief's house, the deputy chief's house, and a couple other locations. And they would answer the phone at night. And they all had buttons that could blow the alarm. And so after we started around the clock, we answered all the fire calls at the fire station. And my most memorable one, a woman called up one day, she was all excited. "My house is on fire, my house is on fire." And I says, "How do we get there?" And she says, "Don't you still have those big red trucks?" So anyway, that's how we answered alarms. And one other little thing back then, you might have heard riding the back step. That two guys would go in the front, the driver and the officer, if there was an officer there, and the 2 or 3 guys would get on the back end of the engine and hold on to a bar. And eventually we got belts to hold us so we wouldn't fall off the back of the engine. And we had them about 3 years, and they started coming out with the 4-man cab, so everybody rode inside. So that's a little bit on a long time ago.
When did the alarm boxes in town?
Oh, we did have alarm boxes, and Steve Slamman's father, Bob, was the fire alarm superintendent. He worked for the state police installing radios in police cruisers, and we ran wires on our days off. We'd borrow Ashland's fire alarm truck, and we ran wires down to the laborers' training, the gas company, and then when South Street got built up, over to South Street. Many a cold day I climbed that ladder, putting fire alarm wire up. And as electronics advanced, I don't believe there's any more fire alarm boxes.
Now we went from hardwire fire alarm boxes to radio boxes, which would actually, if you pulled it in, you'd have like things that would cause it like bing, 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 that would give you the box number, then would send it over the radio frequency. And since then, we've actually dismantled the whole system, and everybody's gone to a private company.
I never thought about fire alarms being, shall we say, uniquely wired, you know, separate from everything else that's strung up on telephone poles.
And on the pole, electricity wires are on the top, the telephone's in the middle, and the fire alarm was usually red wire on the bottom.
You know, everybody got rid of them because they thought they weren't needed, but a couple months ago when they had the 911 crisis in all your big cities, that was the only thing that was working.
Yeah, who knew?
Yeah.
So, Now we shift gears to a more current time.
Yeah. I came on the fire service just as the end of the riding on the back step happened, so I never really got to experience that. It's something I wish I've always had the chance to do. And even at when I was coming on, they were just going away from the 3/4 boots to the full bunker gear. So
Okay, you have to explain that.
So back in the day, they used to have the boots that you could pull up.
Okay, boots.
So now we wear full like pants and jackets and that stuff. When they used to have the 3/4 boots with the longer coats and the leather helmets, whereas nowadays you can't wear any of that. So that's stuff that I always look at in his era. I wish I got to do. It just looked a lot funner.
So when we chatted in your office and you talked about problems because of a house construction issue.
Right.
So, you know, I think about, Bill, that when you started, houses were pretty simple. They were wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, you didn't have to worry too much about anything but squirting water on the wood.
I think a lot of it was the furniture was built out of too. It was like real wood, you know, cotton. It's not this flammable material, plastics.
My father's generation, they'd go in with no breathing equipment and suck a little smoke in, but it was wood smoke, and they'd come out and most of them have a cigarette and go on with the thing. You know, when I came on, they had what they call an MSA. It was 2 canisters, a little thing in the front, and we had 2 Scott air packs for the whole department, and everybody loved the MSAs. And then what started happening, especially in big cities and stuff, guys were going into cellar fires and they were dying with the MSAs on. Well, the MSA just filters the oxygen out of the air. Well, you go into a cellar and the oxygen gets eaten up by the fire and there's no oxygen and these guys are dying. So with the Scott air packs or any air pack, the tank on the back is your air.
Right.
So you bring your air in with you.
What does MSA stand for?
It's mine safety.
Mine Safety Associated.
Yeah, it's just a brand. They
It
have
was a brand,
MSA.
just like
Scott.
Scott is a brand, is
Yeah,
different.
yeah, yeah.
We
Okay.
happen to use Scott's, and that's how that evolved. And
You know, like in today, there's all kinds of things in houses that are toxic.
Yeah.
everything is one breath you're cooked.
Yeah, the furniture is like basically like gasoline you're sitting on once it goes. And like in his era, a fire would take, you know, like 10 to 15, 20 minutes before everything in the room got the temperature and could flash over. Nowadays, it's like 3 to 5 minutes. And we're not even out the door halfway there when the whole room is going, if not.
Yeah, and I know, I know residential building codes, at least there's talking about sprinklers. Is that anything in the current thinking?
They're trying to mandate it at like a building construction level, but you know, between the builders and getting that passed is very hard. Hopkinton's done a very good job actually pushing for residential sprinklers. All of Legacy Farm is actually suppressed for residential sprinklers. And then a lot of the newer homes that we build, we asked the homeowners if they were willing to put sprinklers in. We really appreciate it. So we've been pushing at our lower level as much as we can.
Going back one step to the fire detectors. Hopkinton was the first town in Massachusetts to require hardwired smoke detectors. And Chief Stewart was taken to court, and they lost. It became everywhere. It's a law everywhere now. But Hopkinton was the first town in Massachusetts, and there was one guy that was. He adamantly, he was building a new house. It was down in Colul's development. He was adamantly against smoke detectors. He stood up at town meeting, and it was awful. So he got the house built, and a few years later, I was working one night, and we got a call for a fire down on Teresa Road. We went down there, and the house was on one end, the garage, and was like a little room in the middle, and it was all on fire. And Bob Bartlett was a deputy chief, and he told me, he said, take the, I'll go around back with a pike pole to break the window, and you take the line in the front, and when I bipped the radio, hit it. So I did, I hit the fire and it went out, we put it out in about 5 minutes. Well, that guy, he and his wife had been having a cocktail, and they had a disagreement, and she went to bed and he went for a walk, and he came home and they had a candle going, and they both forgot about the candle. And about 2 hours later, this happened. Next town meeting, he stands up and he says, I got to retract what I said before. It's the best thing I ever put in my house, that smoke detector was hardwired, because we'd rather know when there's a fire downstairs when we're upstairs so we can get out, rather than for the fire to catch up, come up the stairs and get us. So that was a little story of
Speaking of forgotten candles, David Lacquadera lived on Morse Lane, and there was a candle burning in a plastic chimney that they forgot about, and we I don't know that we woke up before sirens, but we woke up and our bedroom kind of looked in that direction, and just huge flames, and it burned up the entire side of his house. I mean, he was fine. The house was able to be repaired because the fire was basically on the outside of the house. But, you know, the prompt knowledge of what's going on is a big key to getting out.
What's interesting is that you're saying that Hopkinton kind of pushed the first sprinkler law, smoke detector bill. We're actually one of the biggest, not case studies, I guess you could use the word case study, for residential sprinklers. We had 2 house fires in 1 week. One was in Legacy, it was a house under construction, and the builder had oily rags, finished up for the day, left them in the house.
I'm sorry.
So the sprinkler activated, put the fire out. Fire was contained to the room. There was a little bit of water damage. He was able to have that cleaned up, built, and it's already occupied. Later on that week, we had another house under construction that did not have residential sprinklers. It's a total loss, and the foundation is still sitting there. So,
When a sprinkler system is set off, I assume it continues even after the fire is out. It continues.
Yes.
There's nothing to shut it off until a human shuts it off.
correct. But it's not like on your TVs where every one in the house opens up. It's just the one that's exposed to heat.
My wife and I just about every night watch Emergency that's on at 10 o'clock, and it's great to critique them. And the biggest problem I have with that show is they got these roaring fires, and watch them in there. When you got that much fire, you can't see your hand in front of your face. And I know why they do it, so you can see what they're doing, but it's everything else is pretty close to. I got mentioned on that Emergency. I used to do a lot of clam bakes for Ed McCormick, and I did a clam bake, and this guy had about 6 bowls of my clam chowder, and so Ed introduced me to the guy, and he was a liaison between the LA Fire Department and the TV show. She says, I'm going to get this on a TV show. So there was a show one night where they had Dick Butkus was on the show. He got tackled by his kids. So they come back to the station, and they said, what's for dinner? And the guy cooking the dinner said, New England clam chowder. So he got it on the show. So.
But if you use emergency, a way to segue is like EMS. How much we are doing with the ambulances nowadays, compared to probably when you were on the job.
That's a huge change from. I can remember. So my family moved from Westwood to Norwell when I was 21, and the police had cars that were station wagons. And that was the ambulance. There was nothing but to shove a person into it and take them to the hospital. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think today, if you go for like a heart attack, you're not in a hurry to go to the hospital because you can do everything basically that can be done in the ER right there.
Yeah.
Well, Hopkinton had an ambulance before my time. It was Carl Free who owned the gas station where Terry's was, where Main Street gas station is now. There was a garage behind that housed the Hopkinton ambulance. And I remember seeing it. It was a white old vehicle, and they discontinued that around 50, 51, and they got the first police cruiser, and it was a station wagon, like you say, and they used to, actually, Joe Pine we had the first cruiser that was a station wagon, and even when I started, we transported, and by then the police department had a station wagon cruiser, and that's how we transported people. People had asked me, how'd you do CPR? Well, there was no such thing as CPR. It was like grab, put them in, and get there as fast as you can. And I've seen in Rockland, Maine, that my in-laws lived next door to a funeral home that had a hearse and an ambulance, and it made you wonder how hard they worked. But I've actually seen them take people from an accident scene, put them in the back, and both guys, nobody stayed in the back with the patient.
Right.
They get in the front and just transported. So it was like grab and run, and now we evolved to we got our first ambulance around 1970, and we would do some things for the patients, what we were trained to do. And at the end of my career, they had paramedics at the hospitals that would come and meet us at the scene. And the night we delivered a baby, Bob Santucci and I delivered a baby, and they got there just as and they cut the cord. And but that went on for a few years. When I retired, they were still coming from the hospitals, and then now you have paramedics.
Yeah, when I first started, we were still intercepting with either Milford or Natick. And then,
how do you think this, shall I call it mobile care?
Yeah.
How do you think that's been influenced? And I hate to bring this up, but you both got military backgrounds. How do you think that this current care, level of care that we're doing, has been outgrowths of first aid activities in the Korean, Vietnam wars, etc.?
Starting with MASH,
Yeah.
There's actually two styles of EMS. There's like the United States, which is like load and go, and then you got the European, which is more like a stay and play. And then the United States is actually kind of transitioning to do more on scene. Like the trauma patients, you need them, get them to the hospital. They need surgery. They need what they call like bright lights, blood, and
yeah. Well, that was me. I mean, I was scraped up off the pavement.
Yeah. But now, I mean, we're carrying clotting agents on the ambulance. We're back to tourniquets. They come and go. But I think where we really make the biggest difference is like in cardiac care nowadays. What the paramedics are doing. If you have a cardiac arrest, it's no different than whether you have it at a house or in the back of the ambulance. The drugs that we're carrying, the monitors, the way these girls can, shock patients, intubate, it's unbelievable.
Okay, so fancy word, they intubate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just basically they insert a breathing tube into you to help you breathe if you're not.
I remember the first time I ever did CPR on a person. It was an very elderly lady that was very frail, and I did the CPR, and I could hear the ribs cracking. And we get to the hospital, and she passed away, but we get to the hospital, and I was very upset. The doctor came over to me and said, if she had had the heart attack here, we couldn't have saved her. And he said, do not worry about breaking a couple ribs. We can fix ribs, but we can't bring people back to life. So it helped my psyche to
I can't remember when CPR really came out, but my family had a sailboat, and there was a guy, we were outside of Boston Harbor, and the guy had a heart attack, and it came out on the ship-to-shore radio. And we went over. My father had a class in CPR at Raytheon. He was doing CPR. I was in charge of the boat. And then this helicopter comes flying in, and I had to get well away from the scene so that the helicopter wash didn't get us. But that would have been, I was probably still in high school. Does that seem about right? Later 60s?
Yeah. Yeah, before CPR, we used to have an oxygen setup that forced, I forget the name for it, so long ago.
Positive pressure?
Positive pressure.
Something.
It breathe,
Forced air,
force the
Yeah.
oxygen, and that worked about as good as my left foot. uh, it just didn't work very good. The only person I ever actually brought back was when, for a little while, we did the precordial thump. I thumped this woman that had her heart stopped in the back of the ambulance, and I saved her life. About a year later, she sent me an invitation to her daughter's wedding because she was so happy that.
Yeah,
Any other time I did CPR on anybody, it never, most of them, they were gone anyway. But
yeah, they've actually had a couple saves this year
Yeah.
between the electricity and the CPR.
yeah, the electricity.
Yeah.
So we were like from the dark ages to a little clear of the dark ages when I was on. And
Okay, so we're running up on our clock here, gentlemen. I found this interesting. I hope that you found this interesting.
I actually think we just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, we could. There's a lot.
Yes, we could do this again. But what I'm interested in those many people watching this program, if you have suggestions about things of interest. So I've got nurses on tap to talk about nursing, how it used to be and how it is, house building, how it used to be, how it is, and I have a big long list of possibilities. But if you think there's something that would be of interest as to, and car mechanics. I have someone on the string for that. How working on cars has changed. Anyway, I think that's a wrap. And thanks for watching and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
well.